Good morning and good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome all to those joining us here on Zoom. The Strategic Technology and Cybersecurity Program at the Middle East Institute is pleased to convene this expert panel titled The Middle East and Navigating the US-China Tech Cold War. My name is Mohammed Suleiman, and I serve as the Director of the Middle East Institute Strategic Technologies and Cybersecurity Program. I'm very excited to be moderating today's discussion, which will review the concerns, the 2024 technology landscape, focusing on the Middle East contributions, concerns, and how the region is being affected. We'll talk about emerging technology trends and associated risk likely to dominate next year, from the rise of generative AI to the use of smart sensors and beyond. We'll be exploring how these new technologies impact the ongoing US-China technology Cold War, as we call it, and what are the ripple effects on the Middle East region. What opportunities do the latest technological advancements offer to the Middle East and the global community? And what are the challenges? We will have a deep dive into all of these questions and more shortly. Our panelists today consist of three esteemed experts and friends. To start off, Aisha Chavi, who is a non-resident scholar with our tech program here at the Middle East Institute. She focuses on policy and national security implications of critical technologies. She focuses more on AI, quantum innovation, and cybersecurity. We also have Rishi Agnar, who's a reporter at Foreign Policy, covering the intersection of geopolitics and technology. And prior to joining FP, he spent 6 years at CNN Business as indie editor in New Delhi and technology writer in San Francisco. And finally, we're joined by Suhaila Sabai, who is a non-resident scholar with the tech program here at MEI as well. She focuses on the nexus of U.S. foreign policy and emerging technologies and cybersecurity. She served before as a foreign affairs officer with the U.S. Department of State. She currently works with 5i partners to develop strategic alignment and resilience in the realms of cybersecurity and critical infrastructure. I want to thank our panelists. I also want to thank the audience for joining us today. We're going to get started with some questions that we have prepared for the panelists. And then if the time allows, we'll open it up for folks to submit their own questions in the chat function in Zoom. The first question I only have for one specific panelist is going to be a scene setter for the three of you to give us a review of how you perceive the current US-China tech Cold War and how you think about the implications of this competition on the Middle East region. Let me start with Suhail.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mohammed. Let me first start out by saying thank you to you for hosting this today and to the Middle East Institute for putting this on. I'm looking forward to the conversation with the two other panelists as well, Alicia and Rishi. So thanks for allowing us to be here, and hopefully it'll be a great discussion. But to get to the topic that we're all here to talk about. So I think the US-China tech Cold War has been marked by escalating tensions between the two powers regarding technology, trade, and security, where we have both nations vying for dominance in crucial technological fields like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, 5G networks, quantum computing, cloud computing, semiconductor development, and the list goes on, really. For third-party countries, particularly in the Middle East, this situation presents a very complex landscape where Middle Eastern countries find themselves in a delicate balancing act as they maintain economic ties with China and the US, with stronger economic ties with China, but stronger security and strategic ties to the US. So the implications can really vary. I don't think that the Middle East necessarily views themselves as firmly on one side of this binary. However, Middle Eastern countries are seen as more closely aligned with China when it comes to tech space and are already dealing with the consequences of that, as we saw in August with the chip export controls announcement and concerns surrounding certain AI companies in the UAE. So since 2018, the United States has succeeded in persuading many firms and allied nations worldwide to decouple from Chinese technology and supply chains. But that year, Chinese investment in infrastructure projects declined in every region except the Middle East and North Africa. Chinese tech, such as Huawei, has become very integrated into Middle East tech systems, so making that even a more complicated landscape to navigate. This has created a level of economic dependency, as mentioned before, where many Middle Eastern countries are relying on Chinese investments in technology for their infrastructure projects while also having strong economic and strategic ties with the US. So any disruptions in these relationships due to the tech Cold War would impact their economic stability. More than 10 years ago, China's trade with the Middle East surpassed the US, and today it far exceeds that. And it is an increasingly significant supplier of foreign direct investment. The US is as well, but that is kind of slowly eroding over time. I think another potential impact and implication is market access and innovation. So the tech Cold War could influence access to cutting edge technologies and markets. Restrictions imposed by either the US and China might limit opportunities for innovation and market penetration in the Middle East. I think we could see more restrictions on the Middle East depending on the further extent of integration in of Chinese tech. And this could limit US cooperation based on further integration. So I think this could lead to an eventuality where they kind of are forced to choose a camp or do some more diversification. I don't think that they want to be cut off or restricted from access to US markets. I think just one further implication is security. So the region's security also could be affected by as this rivalry extends to cybersecurity and data privacy. And again, they might face pressure to align with one or the other in terms of data security and intelligence sharing. So I will leave it there and allow the other panelists to also provide their perspective now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sohail. Alicia, how about you?
No, thank you so much for hosting us today on the panel, and for everyone who's joining us to listen. Welcome. And to Sohaila's points, in our strategic competition environment between the US and China, there is a choice that you have to make to pick a camp, or you're going to be stuck in the middle and lose access to certain key markets. But all in all, I think that Middle East countries especially have had the opportunity to be able to focus on where to cooperate and where to focus on honing their own ecosystem. And by fostering foreign investments and welcoming companies, from different countries, not just the US and China, but also European countries, and welcoming investments to really build up hubs to mark themselves at the forefront of digitalization. For instance, the Saudi Arabia's vision of 2030 really focuses on healthcare, economic well-being and education for their own people, but as well as reinforcing the idea of welcoming others to come through. So there's constructions of airports, there's constructions of edge computing, and really important hubs that are powered by great companies that are involved in the region, and making sure that they empower their local partners as well. So all in all, it could be a great thing for the future, but also taking into consideration the security concerns. So when you're picking certain partners, there is the prominence of Huawei and other companies that have some security vulnerabilities. And so that is where you have to really focus on the competition aspect of the strategic competition and tech competition that we're seeing right now. Is where do you really need to pick the right partners, and making sure that you adhere to international cybersecurity standards, as well as participating in conversations that are happening in emerging tech frontiers such as AI. So when you have the G7, the European and US putting forward AI principles for ethical and safe use of and generation of AI, you have Saudi Arabia putting forward their AI ethics principle recently. They had just an updated version, and other countries as well. So those are some of the opportunities I'm seeing in the region. So we're not necessarily locked into some challenges, but there are a lot more opportunities to be seen moving forward.
Thank you, Alicia. Rishi?
Yeah, first of all, echoing everyone, thank you for hosting this, what promises to be a fascinating discussion, and thank you for having me. And so I think Sohaila and Alicia captured a lot of the landscape really well. I think overall, what I would say is that in 2024, we're only likely to see this competition intensify further. We've already seen moves from the US on chips, on the AI executive order, and a lot of it is aimed at kind of slowing China's rise. And I think the Middle East, as Alicia pointed out, has been in this unique position of having close ties, or maybe unique is the wrong word, because a lot of countries kind of straddle the space between the US and China. I think you see what happened, what has been happening in Europe, and the debates that have been happening there could be kind of instructive for Middle Eastern countries as well, where many European countries still have exposure to the Chinese economy, Chinese companies, but there has been a debate on to what extent that they need to dial that back. And I think that the way the dynamics of this, the two big powers are shaping up, countries will increasingly be forced to pick a side. Suhaila mentioned the recent AI company G42 from the UAE, which just recently, because of its ties to China, is being looked into, according to reports by U.S. intelligence agencies, and their CEO just said that we will dial back our exposure to Chinese technology, and so you see that when I talk to kind of U.S. officials here, a lot of them say our biggest strength is the allies and partners we have around the world. Like China doesn't have that, and because of that, the US potentially has the wherewithal to really exert a kind of pressure on countries that and increasingly, yeah, they're just being forced to pick sides, but there is room for countries to forge their own path, which a lot of the Middle Eastern countries, especially the Gulf states, which are some of the wealthiest countries in the world and have their own like very strong burgeoning economies, they are forging their own path to a certain extent, but it's definitely going to shape how every country in the world and region responds.
No, excellent answer. I think from my travels, I think we have a confluence of multiple factors that we're seeing. We're seeing a diversion between the US view on China, which is full decoupling in very critical technologies. And we see when you're in Brussels, you hear, of course, US-ing is the main theme, but because you cannot really limit and fully end their entire tech relationship with China. Part of it is economics, part of it is market access, part of it also the lack of local cohesion within Brussels about finding a unified position. But in the Gulf, I would say it has multiple effects, multiple reasons for that. Part of it is digital transformation is massive. So there's a lot of fiscal spending on many of these digital initiatives. Second, they're in the middle. I mean, they are not allies. They're not Five Eye partners. They're not NATO allies. They are partners. Therefore, they have always the luxury of dealing with everyone. And limiting and fully decouple the Gulf countries from China, it doesn't feel that this is something feasible or within hand for policymakers. I have another question that's also going to be thematic for the three of you. And I want to thank you for the perfect answer you gave to the first one. This one is actually more global, more about the actual technology. In 2024, what are the kind of technological trends you see that are going to dictate the course of 2024 everywhere? Meaning, every 2 years or every 18 months, we have a new trend, right? Under the second half of Trump administration, everything was about 5G, and then we had the Clean Network Initiative. After that, we had the crypto blockchain around the pandemic first year, I believe. And then, if you remember, we had the metaverse situation, and now we have AI, generative AI. So in your point of view, what's a new thing? What's the thing on the horizon? And also, what are the other top tech that will lead to more local inflection points in 2024? Alicia, you want to start with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I see this in different buckets, and I hate to break it to you, but 5G and AI will not go away. And 5G will remain one of the most important trends that folks will need to, and countries will need to focus on. So the three buckets that I see for global tech trends will be, one will be the foundational ones that we need to continue investing in, really fostering collaboration, but also making sure that the systems are trusted, reliable, and safe. And that is AI, cyber, edge computing, biotech, and 5G. Those are a lot of big buckets. And obviously, we need to focus a little bit more strategically in where we invest, especially in the Middle East and other countries that may have limited resources or may want to focus more specifically on what their society needs today. But those are the five foundational tech trends that I would see for 2024. Biotech, most importantly, because of what we saw with COVID, how rapidly we needed to field vaccines and across the world and accelerate drug discovery and treatments for folks. And that is because we had lives at stake. But also cyber, because when you're developing AI systems and edge computing and biotech, you need those systems and you need those networks and those infrastructure to be safe. 5G, that is a continuing story that you don't want to repeat what happened in the US, where we didn't really tackle this at the forefront a few years ago. And then we were embedded with some unsafe and unreliable tech stack and elements that are now embedded in our rural environments, and it is so expensive to rip and replace. You're seeing it right now, where we declared Huawei, ZTE, and other affiliated companies to be a threat to our national security because of the backdoors, the ability to spy, the ability to tap into the networks, and etc. But it is incredibly expensive to rip and replace, and to your point, maybe almost unfeasible to completely decouple and close our walls off. But to get ahead of this for Open RAN and 6G, you really need to start diversify the pool of competitors internationally, open doors to some major companies that have tech savvy talent and infrastructure, European, American, other companies that will be able to help on the ground. The second bucket would be the new trends, would be space and quantum computing. I'm not talking about quantum physics and, time travel or anything like this that everyone thinks is the future, but I'm talking about tangible post-quantum cryptography, quantum sensing, to be able to better position yourself and provide alternative GPS, for instance. I'm talking about space for satellite, when you're sending new data feeds and you're sending a large amount of new satellites that are commercially available. How are you going to make those safer? And how are you going to be able to collaborate and be interoperable with other companies or countries that are also equally investing? And the last bucket, which is really fundamental, is infrastructure investment, both physical and digital. So we're just talking about it multiple times. The Gulf states are investing heavily in that front to really empower digital transformation. So digital twins, big data, blockchain, but really you have to have the physical infrastructure, you have to have the compute centers, you have to have the data centers, you have to have the healthcare system and financial systems in place to be able to tap with your phone, to be able to order your Uber, to be able to transfer some blockchains or money to pay services. So from strategic to day-to-day lives, these are some of the buckets that I see for the next year.
Rishi, how about you?
Yeah, I'm really glad Alicia introduced the term buckets to the conversation, because that's how I think about my reporting beat in DC here as well. And so the buckets that I have seen, it was kind of when I first took this job and moved to DC about a year ago. TikTok was kind of its own bucket, which has the conversation around that has diminished slightly, not completely gone away. There's concern about social media that continues. We've been having this conversation for the last decade, but like safety and security around social media in general. And I think that is going to come into play, particularly in 2024 globally, when you look at the number of elections happening around the world. You have more than 50 countries holding national elections, a variety of sort of local and state elections, and then there's chips, which has been another big bucket of its own that I've been focusing on. And I think what's really interesting is when you talk about this conversation around kind of de-risking, decoupling, and everyone's trying to sort of find the right balance. But there is a trend, and kind of the US-led trend, of trying to reorient the global supply chain to sort of either effectively cut out or backstop China. And the US is using, again, like I said in my earlier response, its sort of network of allies and partners. You have chip deals with India, with Indonesia, and then individual companies, Intel and TSMC, building new fabs in Europe. And then, of course, you have CHIPS Acts here in the US and in Europe, and every country is kind of trying to create their own semiconductor ecosystem and then have those work together. But I think a lot of the groundwork happened in 2023, and then over the next year, 2 to 5 years, I mean, it's a long horizon to actually get these chip fabs up and running. But we're going to start to see a lot of that play out, and kind of what the effects are. And then I think AI is the thing that undercuts all of this. A lot of so much of AI is about compute and access to those chips. So it's all sort of interconnected, and a lot of the US chip export controls are specifically aimed at China's AI sector and the applications, and what China could use AI to do, China or other US adversaries as Washington sees it. And then connecting it back to the social media and elections point as well, with generative AI, which allows you to kind of create text and images and video through simple prompts, and kind of democratizes, for lack of a better word, the access to these things. That has big implications for mis and disinformation, for cybersecurity as well, which is another big bucket that tends to be part of my day to day. And as Alicia mentioned, I think quantum is the next thing that people are starting to talk about, when it's anywhere from depending on who you talk to, like 3 years to 30 years away. But the point at which quantum computing is powerful enough to break the encryption of the internet as we know it. And that's something that the US at least is already preparing for, trying to get all their data behind the new wall that will not be able to be broken by quantum cryptography. That's a slightly maybe longer horizon conversation, but it is starting to happen.
Suhaila?
Sure. So I think we are all thinking about this in very similar ways. I think, as Alicia mentioned, AI, 5G are not going away. So as they both mentioned, there is definitely a race to dominate AI, to dominate the field. But I think in addition to just the race to produce the best in AI, there's also going to be a trend of trying to secure and regulate AI and get ahead of AI. Rishi touched on these earlier, but obviously the White House released an executive order on the safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence in October. The UK hosted its first global AI safety summit in early November. And then following that, it released guidelines for secure AI systems in cooperation with 21 other agencies, including all of the members of the G7. I think maybe just a notable point that I want to put on that is that the only country from the Middle East that co-sealed those guidelines was Israel. So maybe just something to keep in mind for later in the conversation. And then also just last week, we had the European Union reach a provisional agreement on the European Union AI Act that really put so some strong provisions around the development and use of AI. So I think we're going to see that trend continue of governments trying to really get ahead of the development and the tech there. I also think that a potential, I want to focus on the impacts of the development of AI for global dynamics. I think that we have the potential to see a deepening divide between democratic and autocratic countries, similar to what we're seeing in the cybersecurity space, with democratic countries focusing on security and safety, individual rights, transparency, and accountability of AI, while we'll see some autocracies more likely to prioritize their control and power over the technology. And then I think there's also going to be questions about how it's used militarily and how this will be reconciled in international standards. So not just the civilian use of AI, but how governments are going to use it, especially in military settings. I also had post-quantum cryptography as one of my areas or buckets for a trend this year. So now that we are seeing the potential of quantum computers to crack these crack different algorithms, as Rishi already mentioned, we're going to see the development or the work to develop and deploy post-quantum cryptographic systems to have, and countries that are able to do that on a faster timeline will have an advantage over those that are not. One thing I also want to touch on is the Internet of Things, smart cities, and connected communities. Smart cities use technology to optimize infrastructure and services, improve the quality of life for residents, and promote sustainability. So I think the impacts of that as IoT and smart cities can help reduce carbon emissions and promote sustainability by optimizing energy usage, reducing waste, and improving transportation systems, helping countries reach their climate change commitments, which is obviously also a really big thing right now, the race to reduce carbon emissions and meet those commitments. And they can also improve public safety by using data to identify and respond to potential threats such as natural disasters and crimes. On the flip side of that, I think there are increased concerns about the use of smart cities devices for increased surveillance, loss of privacy, and social inequality. I've seen some reports coming out of COP28 about concerns of all of the surveillance cameras around there. And then another concern, I think, with smart cities and a consideration that will be amplified in the next year is the increased digital attack surface. So smart cities are an attractive target for criminals and cyber threat actors, including nation state actors or sub-nation state actors, to exploit vulnerable systems, to steal critical infrastructure data and proprietary information, conduct ransomware operations, and launch cyber attacks. So this can have the impact of disrupting infrastructure services, significant financial loss, exposure of citizens' private data, trust in the systems, et cetera. And so again, I think we're going to see a trend to not only think about, and I think that this is already an issue we're having, where we have countries that have already significantly invested in the Internet of Things, have started connecting devices, not just on the national level, but even on the state level, and then now thinking about the cybersecurity implications of that. So I think that will definitely be something that nations are forced to reconcile with in 2024.
This looks like an academic lecture by all of you. That's fantastic. Rishi, first of all, I want to applaud you for your coverage, which has been very instrumental for many of us in terms of news analysis on the latest tech trends. Also, you touch upon that, but you spend a lot of the stories you wrote this year have been revolving around the AI craze, the AI, generative AI, post-ChatGPT, and how our government is thinking about that, the ripple effect. You and I, we had conversations about that. I believe that was before the UKI Safety Summit. Now we're in December 2023, heading 2024. Generative AI has been, commercially speaking, in the public eye for the last year, more than a year now. In your viewpoint, what's the regional impact on the Middle East? What's the global impact? Are we doing enough? Like, is the UKI Safety Summit enough? Is it OECD? Is it G7? Is it G20? I mean, It's a big question, but you're the right person to answer.
Thank you for those kind words. I think with AI, yeah, as you pointed out, the majority of my stories have been on AI and on this kind of global conversation in the past year, just because it has been what's dominating that conversation. And I think as it briefly came up earlier, Suhaila mentioned there's kind of on the one side a race to develop this AI, but also on the other side, a race to govern and put guardrails around it. So you had the executive order. I mean, it just shows, I guess, the sign of the times. You had the Biden administration's executive order on AI, the UN, the United Nations Advisory Board on AI, and the UK AI Safety Summit all come out essentially within 1 week, in about a month or two ago. And so it's a lot of these conversations are happening, and both in the kind of bilateral and multilateral forums. And I think at the edges, it's kind of how do we ensure that AI is used for good. There are a lot of applications. For the UN, for example, always talks about how can AI be harnessed to reach the sustainable development goals. And then at the other extreme, the other edge, you talk about AI's application in military and warfare and weapons, for example, but there are also much more real everyday risks in terms of surveillance, in terms of bias, and so those are the things that are the conversation is kind of centering around. And I think it from countries, most governments' perspective, you again compare it to the social media regulation era, where there were a lot of missteps and there was a sense of catch up. I think the sense now is that we cannot afford to get caught and to get left behind this technology on AI, and so a couple of dynamics that creates is, one is that there is a lot more partnership with the companies, which is both good and bad. The companies are the ones, the industry is the one that understands this technology, but then there's concerns about having them a bit too close to the regulation as well. And then the second is sort of balancing the existential sort of doomsday scenario with actual sort of applications, and it's how not just regulating AI and the technology itself, but what are the existing regulations? Because AI cuts across all these sectors. You have existing copyright laws, you have existing laws around policing and surveillance. How much can those be applied to AI before you need additional sort of regulation? And I think the conversations are in a very nascent stage right now, because it's hard. Countries have competing visions, competing priorities. It's hard to reach that consensus. There was briefly talk about like regulating AI the same way that you regulate nuclear proliferations with the International Atomic Energy Agency, and creating that sort of framework. It hasn't quite happened yet, and the implementation is really where this is going to be tested, and a lot of that will happen in 2024. And I've been rambling broadly about the global scene for a while, but I think coming to the Middle East, the example I find most interesting is the UAE. They are among the first countries, if not the first country, to have appointed a minister specifically for AI. And so you see the equal sort of priority, and at the same time they have, I think it's called their Falcon model, which has been praised in the industry. I haven't looked too deeply into sort of the actual efficacy of that, but there has been a lot of attention on what they're doing on the AI development front, they do have a lot of resources and are throwing it behind it. So I think what's interesting, you have Saudi Arabia also, that going back to the SoftBank Vision Fund has been prioritizing sort of tech and tech investment. So I think there is a focus in the Middle East to be part of that conversation, and where possible, even drive the conversation both around development of the technology and around governance and guardrails. So I think it's still early days, and there is a long list of things that need to still happen and be figured out. But it's the conversation is definitely happening, and the Middle East is a part of that.
Thank you, Rishi. Alicia, in your day job, your major focus is defense tech, dual use, which, as a trained engineer, I can argue that tech by nature is dual use. However, we're hearing that term in most of the conversations in DC about dual use technology. What does it mean in terms of our relationship with allies and partners? What does it mean in terms of the US-China tech competition? First of all, what's dual use from an industry standpoint, from a policy standpoint? And in your viewpoint, how countries like in the Gulf, who have fiscal spending on tech transformation, could navigate this landscape of complexity around dual use technologies?
Well, if I had all these answers, then I should probably work for the government. So dual use technologies, to answer your first question, is from industry point is, a technology that has commercial use benefits. So hypothetically, we can think of quantum computing. So, a dual use would be a computer that can, work faster than a traditional computer and can enable research and in the scientific and life and sciences realm in a faster pace that we can ever imagine. But in the military side, to what Sohaila was referring to earlier, civilian versus defense use, in the military side, it can really enable missions and warfighters at the edge by enabling, say you're denied GPS and you're denied navigation in real time. That could be very detrimental to your life as a warfighter. And so quantum sensing in this application would be able to provide an alternate GPS, to provide an approximate version of where you need to head out to make you safe and continue your mission. Dual use technologies are often a negative word and a positive word. Positive for investors, a negative for export control, and for companies that are trying to get into this sector and really scale and offer their innovation that has success on the commercial side. And so export control and international agreements sometimes hamper down commercial innovation and dual use because we need to make sure that they're safe, trusted, reliable. And the whole purpose of export control, the whole purpose of international agreements is to make sure that there's no misuse of those technologies, that you're not embedded certain AI algorithms into certain missiles or certain systems that would, without a human in the loop, cause increasing damage and casualties that are unforeseen. So they're in place for a good reason, but sometimes in specific technological sectors, they might hamper down innovation because you can't integrate certain thermal cameras on certain autonomous systems. You can't integrate certain chips because of where they come from, because they're unsafe. And so Sohaila and Rishi said that a few times, is that this will hamper down a lot of the Middle East ability to scale and innovate. But if you are able to focus on trusted supply chain, trusted capabilities, and trusted partners, you might be able to address the dual use technology environment. Now, the last thing I'll say is that the most important way for the Gulf countries to get involved or really navigate this challenging environment is to continue to participate in international standards setting and bodies, and continue to work with companies to create some sort of friendly investment environment and work on potential pilots that are not on, the classified or the military side, but more of the civilian side. And something that we're seeing is data safety and privacy. So when you're looking at 23andMe, this is more of a commercial, it's a really cool opportunity for all of us to find out where we're from and our ancestors. That could be a dual use technology because from the defense perspective, this is valuable information. It also enables in the medical field for warfighters and others. It really advances certain sets of information, but just purely in this dual use environment with the massive data breach. Now we have hackers and malicious actors that have access to DNA information. It's very sensitive information that now they can pull and use and leverage against victims or countries. 23andMe is just a very minor example, but there's a reason why export control and international standards exist and why cybersecurity standards are highly important, especially in those small to big commercial and dual use technologies. And I'm using this, and I'm not even mentioning nuclear weapons or AI has, I think in the spectrum of how dangerous it can be. AI, I think, is a lot closer to nuclear weapons and other dual use level technologies.
Thank you, Alicia. Concise as always. Suhaila, before you worked with Five Eyes, you were stationed in Riyadh, lived and worked in Saudi Arabia. So you lived in the Gulf, you work the region, you understand tech, you work on tech. In your viewpoint, what are the biggest contributions that the Gulf is offering that we don't really talk about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I was living in Saudi Arabia before and around the 2018 to 2021 and saw a lot of interesting developments, truly saw the economic diversification that was happening, the development that was happening, the aspirations for smart cities such as NEOM. When I was there, it was still very, and it's still in rudimentary phases, but definitely saw that shift. And having traveled to Saudi Arabia in the past, I just huge fundamental differences. And so I think, the Gulf in particular is indeed gaining traction in the global tech arena. And they are really at the forefront of this transformation. I think some key things that are happening to support that is that Gulf countries are actively supporting the tech sector through initiatives like funding, tax incentives, and creating a regulatory environment conducive to innovation, which aims to attract talent, investment, and technology partnerships. Of course, they have the ability to do this because they're very wealthy states, but just to concentrate on a few of those points. So obviously in the AI space, I won't touch on this too much because it's already been covered by Rishi and in our previous conversation, but obviously the UAE is really a pioneer in the AI space, developing the Arabic large language models such as Falcon and Jace. And in addition to that, establishing a university, the Mohammed bin Zayed University of AI, and hosting the Dubai Assembly for Generative AI this year. As I mentioned before as well, the enhanced regulatory environment. So Saudi in particular enhanced their Saudi's Telecoms and Info Technology Act, which has broadened the scope of application from purely telecommunication services under the old law to a range of ICT activities and services. So the act now regulates emerging technologies with a specific focus on promoting digital transformation in Saudi Arabia and encouraging, again, innovation, entrepreneurship, research, and technological development. Another thing that we see them doing is establishing innovation hubs. So, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Israel are investing heavily in innovation hubs, research institutions, and technology-focused initiatives. UAE's initiatives like the Dubai Future Foundation and Area 2071 serve as innovation hubs, inviting regional collaboration, hosting workshops, and fostering partnerships to develop AI and smart city solutions. And then I think kind of related to that is a startup ecosystem. So there's a burgeoning startup ecosystem with a rise in tech startups focusing on various fields, including financial tech, health tech, e-commerce, and AI once again. And as Alicia mentioned earlier, healthcare transformation. So Saudi Arabia's National Transformation Program has placed a significant emphasis on leveraging technology to revamp its healthcare system. So initiatives include establishing centers in new medical technologies, developing health information systems, and investing in med tech startups. And then we're also seeing a digitalization in health monitoring. I think that why this is able to happen, in addition to the investments that are being made by the governments, is also the Middle East young population. So they have a very young, tech-savvy population, which is driving demand for these goods and services, but it's also presenting opportunities for innovation and market expansion. I would say on the flip side of that, as a challenge that they have, is digital literacy and a skilled workforce. So that's an area where we're going to need to see a lot of heavy investing to actually continue to develop the talent and the skills to carry on this emergence. And I think that's a pretty good. I think I've taken quite a good bit of time to explain that, so I'll end there. But
thank you. Rishi, like you mentioned, there are 50 elections, more than 50 elections in 2024. I believe one of my friends said, maybe The Economist, he read it in one of the articles in The Economist, it could even be more than 70 elections next year. Of course, US elections, Mexico elections, we have India elections. I mean, we have big democratic nations going to the ballot next year. We also have the Gaza war. And what does it mean in terms of information war? So the question is deepfakes, meaning 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that was always a theory. Like, what if we're hit by deepfakes? What if we are not able to identify deepfakes? And it was always what if. We have witnessed the first deepfake ad deployed in US elections, and I believe that was in a Republican primary a few months ago, and that was the first use that we know of. And now we have a conflict in Gaza that's not really confined to Gaza. We're seeing massive wave of information, disinformation on multiple platforms. This is not just a Twitter situation, it's everywhere. So in your assessment, are we addressing this in the right way? What's the right way? If you're looking to a crystal ball in 2024, where do you see the biggest inflection points for deepfakes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a great question, and something that I've been thinking about and talking to a lot of people about. I mean, of course, in Gaza, and then, but even before that in Ukraine, like, you're seeing increasingly that, like, every war now has an online component more than it ever did, and like you said in your question, every war is now an information war of sorts, and a lot gets determined by who is better at kind of shaping that narrative. And deepfakes, I think, have been a big focus of regulatory efforts, just because they are such a stark application, and it's in some cases with tech, it's like, okay, like we've mentioned quantum a bunch of times. In some senses, it is still kind of abstract and nebulous, where you don't really know, like, okay, sure, this could happen, but people can't visualize it. With things like generative AI, especially, the reason that ChatGPT led to this explosion in both, like, race to develop and race to govern, is because it's something that you can see, and, like, you can directly see and anticipate the effect. So the only work trip I did in the last year was actually to Las Vegas for DEF CON, this big hacker conference. And the White House actually partnered with a bunch of these companies there. It's not a hacker conference, is not maybe not where you would expect them to be, but there was a red teaming exercise, which for those who don't know is kind of a concept in cybersecurity where you try and break defenses, break systems. And so there was an effort to see how that would play out in AI. And the big difference, I think, between cyber and generative AI, so deepfakes, but also text and audio deepfakes are a big issue, is I think with cyber, it's malicious actors who are trying to specifically break those defenses. With AI, when you're just typing stuff into a chatbot, you can create harmful effects purely by accident, which is a whole other arena to open up. So I think there have been moves towards there's concepts like red teaming, like watermarking, which a lot of companies and governments, the White House executive order included, have talked about watermarking as sort of clearly telling people when something is created by AI so that you look and you immediately know. So the kind of devil's advocate side of it, things as I see it, is one, because people are a lot more aware of AI and its possibilities and effects, they may be more vigilant in terms of identifying and especially in the context of things like elections. That's the hope, that we've built up enough. I think Sam Altman at APEC, he called them like societal antibodies to these applications. But at the same time, to your question of is it enough, I think it's the sense I've gotten from the people I've spoken to is that it's never enough. Like there's the biggest thing is the big unknowns of what this technology can and can't do, and that's something we'll only see when it happens. There is a degree to which you can anticipate, but you can't anticipate everything. So I think, and then the other sort of devil's advocate argument sometimes is that you don't need AI to spread misinformation. Like images from a different conflict taken out of context can have an equally damaging impact, even if they're not generated by AI. But what AI does is makes it much easier, quicker to kind of generate those images, makes it easier to tailor messages. Like if you're talking about sort of influence campaigns, tailor messages to specific audiences in such a way that it'll have the maximum impact. So I think it is something companies, countries, multilateral institutions are all thinking about. But I think what the most important thing is the sense of like you can't set a policy in stone and then hope that it'll be a catch-all for everything that might happen. The big priority I think a lot of countries are seeing is agility, where when something happens, you have to be able to address it quickly before it gets out of hand. So even with the societal resilience and sort of the other things, all it takes is, especially in a charged environment like an election, all it takes is sort of one spark. And coming back to Suhaila's earlier point about digital literacy, when you don't have the kind of digital literacy you need, people who tend to believe anything they see online or get through their WhatsApp family groups, and it kind of spreads like wildfire. That is a kind of potentially dangerous situation to be in. So there are worries. I think we'll just have to see what happens and expect the unexpected in a way.
Thank you, Rishi. Alicia, we have a question from one of the participants, Marisol. And this question, I think, is dear to you, since this is core to the work you do. They're asking, do you consider the restriction measures implemented by the Biden administration in August 2023 for U.S. investment and technology restrictions on China, quantum in quantum computing are efficient to counter influence China?
That's a good question. And all in all, I think that there will be more work to be done on that front, similar to the CHIPS Science Act and some of the semiconductor export control efforts, just because semiconductors have touched upon a wide range of technological innovation in the US and the world. One of the ways that I see this is it's not just restriction measures, but also, to Suhaila and Rishi's point, is also education and talent recruitment. And I think that more can be done as well on that front in the US, especially. While everybody praises and believes some of the top leading institutions are in the US and, in some other areas in the world, we are losing talent and we are not, growing a strong tech-savvy workforce. And so one of the ways that you can actually counter and really stay ahead of the curve in the technological competition vis-a-vis China is education and reinforced policies to really elevate the urgency around quantum innovation. You can make bets on quantum computing, on where and which type of computers and which type of bits that you will need to invest in, but sustainably, it's not feasible. You can't invest in some of the 4 areas. You'll need to make a choice on maybe 2 out of the 4. China is doing that right now. They also have embedded some top leading scientists and doctors around the world, especially in Germany and the US, to really grasp some of the know-how. And so besides the current export control and restriction measures that we have in place, once you identify a company, the problem is it's a whack-a-mole where you're tapping one and another one grows. And so that just is not sustainable. We've seen that in the 5G campaign. We've seen that in semiconductors. It's really more positive measures of stronger investments. So similar to the CHIPS Science Act, where you have tax credit and tax relief measures for companies domestically, invite friendly foreign investments. So we've seen that in Europe, for instance. You have some really growing AI companies like Mistral, the French company that's an LLM company, is backed by Google and Meta. Even though we have some desires to grow our domestic sovereignty and domestic ecosystems similar to Silicon Valley, that's not sustainable. You have sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East. It's not sustainable. They do partner with international entities and banks to be able to foster the right types of investments. But ultimately, I would say, to just end this question, is education, partnered investment, and safe and reliable innovation, and also just really making sure that our leaders and the folks that are making decisions understand what the technology really means and are not just hearing the word, our adversaries are staying ahead of the curve, we need to invest, we need to do this, and then they just say, yes, let's do it, and they don't really think about the implications of what that comes at a cost of. So just being a little bit more informed and having a diversified workforce. So you have digital illiteracy, but also where are women going to fit in there? There are some countries where they're starting to include women in the workforce, but really empower them to become part of this problem set, I think will empower countries to start coming back to the curve if they felt like they were behind.
Thank you, Alicia. One final question. This is for the 3 of you. If you get to advise countries in the middle, countries that are trying to navigate this complex landscape between China and the United States, what would be your top advice? What would be the one advice that you want to give them? Alicia?
I'll go back to my former response, which is tech talent.
Rishi?
Yeah, I don't know how much of a position I am in to give advice. I'm used to sort of talking to a lot of people, but I think what I would say is again, also coming back to my earlier point, we're seeing the importance of just being nimble and agile with regulation and sort of rolling with the punches as they were, and I think that's important for countries to sort of be a part of that conversation.
Suhaila?
Yeah, I would end with the three things. So investing in cybersecurity and resilience, and working with partners to do that. So to ensure the longevity of their tech ecosystem. Working strategically with partners, so working, being a part of international standards bodies, and being a force for good in those as well. And then diversification. So thinking about diversification, not just away from traditional energy sources, but diversifying sources of their tech infrastructure and not being over-reliant on Chinese tech.
Folks, you were wonderful. Suhaila, Rishi, Alicia, thank you so much for your time, your perspectives, your engagement on this panel. Your perspectives have taught me a lot today, and I believe it offered a perspective that's much needed, and our participants truly enjoyed it. I'm getting really good feedback. So thanks so much. Happy holidays. And to our participants, please, I encourage you to check out our webpage and the work we do on the tech landscape. We're the only tech-focused program on the Middle East. Please reach out if you have questions for panelists, for us. If you have subjects that you want us to cover or think about, we encourage you to connect with us. Folks, happy holidays.